I still remember the exact moment my world shifted beneath my feet. It was a warm Saturday evening in Minneapolis, and the Johnson family reunion was in full swing at my parents' house on Elm Street. The smell of barbecue filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and conversation that drifted from the backyard where my extended family had gathered. I had been looking forward to this reunion for weeks. After years of struggling to establish myself as a freelance graphic designer, I had finally landed a contract with a small tech startup. It wasn't much, but it was steady work, and I thought, foolishly as it turned out, that my family would be proud of my progress. I walked into the kitchen to grab a beer from the cooler, still wearing the confidence I'd built up over the past few months. My cousin Michael was there with his wife Sarah, along with my uncle Robert and a few family friends I'd known since childhood. They were all laughing about something, and I smiled as I approached, ready to join in. "Hey everyone," I said, popping open a Budweiser. "What's so funny?" That's when I saw my father standing by the kitchen island with that look I knew all too well. His eyes held that familiar mixture of disappointment and barely contained frustration that had followed me throughout my 32 years of life. "Oh, we were just talking about career achievements," my dad said, his voice carrying that tone that always made my stomach tighten. "Michael here just got promoted to senior partner at his law firm, making $200,000 a year now." I felt my chest tighten, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "That's great, Michael. Congratulations." "And Sarah just closed her biggest real estate deal yet," my father continued, his eyes never leaving mine. $500,000 commission. Can you believe that? I nodded, taking a long drink of my beer. I knew where this was heading. I'd been through this dance before. "Dad, actually, I have some good news too," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "I just signed a 6-month contract with a tech company. It's not huge, but it's steady work. And..." "Tech company?" my father interrupted, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "What kind of tech company hires a... What do you call yourself again? A graphic designer?" The kitchen fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and my face began to burn with embarrassment. But I pushed forward, determined to share my small victory. "It's called Innovate Tech Solutions. They're a startup, but they're growing fast, and they need someone to handle all their visual branding and..." "A startup," my father repeated, shaking his head. "You know what happens to startups, don't you? They fail. Just like everything else you've ever tried." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my hands begin to shake, and I set my beer down on the counter to hide it. "Dad, that's not fair," I said quietly. "I've been working really hard to..." "Working hard?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call sitting in your apartment drawing pictures working hard? You're 32 years old, living in a studio apartment, driving a car that's older than some of the kids here. When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Jim, maybe we should..." No, my father said, raising his hand. "Someone needs to tell him the truth. Look at your cousin Michael. Look at Sarah. They have careers, houses, families. They contribute to society. And what do you have? Dreams? Hopes? You can't pay bills with dreams." I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, but something deeper. Some fundamental belief I'd held onto that maybe someday my father would see me as more than just his greatest disappointment. "I'm trying, Dad," I whispered. "I'm really trying." "Trying isn't enough," he said. And then came the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. "You'll always be the failure of this family. Always. I don't know why I keep expecting anything different." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the distant sounds of the party continuing outside, but in that kitchen, time seemed to have stopped. My cousin Michael was staring at his shoes. Sarah was looking anywhere but at me. Uncle Robert was shaking his head slowly. I set my beer down and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" my father called after me. I turned back to look at him one last time. "I'm leaving." "Good," he said. "Maybe you'll finally understand that running away won't solve your problems." But I was already gone, pushing through the screen door and walking across the lawn toward my beat-up Honda Civic parked on the street. Behind me, I could hear the party continuing, the laughter and conversation resuming as if nothing had happened, as if I had never been there at all. As I drove away from my childhood home, tears blurring my vision, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done trying to earn my father's approval. I was done being the family disappointment. I was done with all of it. But what I didn't know then was that sometimes the things that break us are exactly what we need to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. The drive back to my studio apartment in downtown Minneapolis was a blur of streetlights and stop signs. I parked outside my building, a converted warehouse that had been turned into affordable housing for artists and young professionals, and sat in my car for a long time just breathing. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Michael. "Hey man, I'm sorry about what happened. Dad was out of line." I stared at the message but didn't respond. Sorry didn't undo 32 years of feeling like I was never good enough. Sorry didn't erase the look of disappointment that had lived in my father's eyes since I was a kid. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. My studio was small but clean, with large windows that looked out over the city. My desk was covered with sketches and designs for the Innovate Tech project, work that had made me feel proud just hours ago but now seemed insignificant. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on my couch, staring at the wall where I'd hung some of my best work. A poster designed for a local music festival, a logo for a small restaurant that had since closed, a series of illustrations for a children's book that never got published. My father was right. None of it had amounted to much. The memories came flooding back then, like they always did when I was feeling low. I remembered being 7 years old, bringing home a drawing I'd made in art class. I was so proud of it. A picture of our family standing in front of our house, with a big yellow sun and green grass that went all the way to the edges of the paper. "Look, Dad," I'd said, running up to him as he sat in his recliner reading the newspaper. "I drew us." He'd glanced at the paper for maybe 2 seconds before handing it back to me. "That's nice, son. Why don't you go show your mother?" Even then, I'd felt the sting of his indifference, but I'd kept trying, kept creating, kept hoping that someday I'd make something that would make him proud. In high school, I joined the art club and won a regional competition for a painting I'd spent months working on. When I showed my parents the blue ribbon, my mother had hugged me and put the ribbon on the refrigerator. My father had just nodded and said, "That's good, but you know you can't make a living as an artist, right?" I'd gone to college for graphic design anyway, taking out loans and working part-time jobs to pay for it. When I graduated, I'd shown my parents my portfolio full of projects I'd worked on and awards I'd won. My father had flipped through it quickly and said, "Now you need to find a real job." So I'd tried. I'd worked at a marketing firm for 2 years, creating boring advertisements for insurance companies and car dealerships. I'd made decent money, but I'd felt like I was dying inside. Every day, I'd sit in my gray cubicle creating soulless corporate graphics, watching the clock until I could go home and work on my personal projects. When I'd finally quit to go freelance, my father had been furious. "You're throwing your life away," he'd said. "You had a good job, benefits, security, and you're giving it up to chase some fantasy." "It's not a fantasy, Dad," I told him. "It's my passion. It's what I'm good at. Being good at something doesn't matter if you can't make money doing it," he'd replied. "Passion doesn't pay the bills." That conversation had been 3 years ago, and since then every family gathering had been a variation of the same theme. My father asking when I was going to get a real job, comparing me to my more successful relatives, making little comments about my lifestyle and choices. I tried to prove him wrong. I'd worked 18-hour days, taking on any project I could find. I'd designed logos for local businesses, created marketing materials for non-profits, even did some wedding invitations and birthday party decorations. But it was never enough. I was always just getting by, always one late payment away from having to move back in with my parents. The Innovate Tech contract had felt like a breakthrough. It was the biggest project I'd ever landed, and it came with the possibility of ongoing work. For the first time in years, I'd felt like I was finally on the right track. I'd even started looking at nicer apartments, thinking maybe I could finally afford to move out of my studio. But my father's words had shattered that confidence. "You'll always be the failure of this family." The phrase played on repeat in my mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. My phone rang and I saw my mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she'd keep calling until I did. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, honey," she said, and I could hear the sadness in her voice. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." "It's fine," I lied. "I'm fine." "No, you're not fine, and it's not fine. What your father said, it was cruel and unnecessary." I closed my eyes, feeling the tears threatening again. "Maybe he's right, Mom. Maybe I'm just fooling myself." "Don't you dare say that," she said firmly. "You are talented and hardworking and kind. You create beautiful things that make people happy. That's worth something, even if your father can't see it." "But I'm 32, Mom. I'm living in a studio apartment, driving a car that barely runs. All my friends are buying houses and having kids, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up." "Success looks different for everyone," she said gently. "Not everyone is meant to be a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman. The world needs artists too. It needs people who can see beauty and create it. Try telling that to Dad." There was a long pause. "Your father, he's a good man, but he's from a different generation. He grew up poor, you know. His father worked in a factory his whole life and they struggled. For him, security means everything. He just wants you to be safe. It doesn't feel like love, Mom. It feels like disappointment." "I know, honey, I know." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about my life and where it had gone wrong. Was I being unrealistic? Was I too old to still be chasing dreams? Should I give up and find a corporate job, settle for a life of quiet desperation in exchange for financial security? But as I sat there, surrounded by my art and my work, I felt something stirring inside me. Not defeat, but something else. Something that felt like determination. Maybe my father was right about one thing. I couldn't keep living like this, always struggling, always one step behind. But that didn't mean I had to give up on my dreams. It meant I had to find a way to make them bigger. I walked over to my computer and opened up a new document. At the top I typed 5-year plan. It was time to stop reacting to my father's disappointment and start creating my own definition of success. I didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of the biggest transformation of my life. 3 weeks after the family reunion, I was sitting in a coffee shop in the uptown neighborhood, my laptop open and surrounded by business books I'd checked out from the library. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, kept glancing over at my table, probably wondering why I looked so intense about whatever I was working on. The truth was, I'd been consumed by research. Ever since that night when I'd started my 5-year plan, I'd been diving deep into success stories of graphic designers who'd built thriving businesses. I'd studied their strategies, their business models, their marketing approaches. I'd analyzed what separated the struggling freelancers from the successful entrepreneurs. What I'd discovered was both inspiring and terrifying. The successful ones hadn't just been better artists, they'd been better business people. They'd understood branding, networking, and market positioning in ways I'd never even considered. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Jake, who ran a small marketing agency downtown. Coffee later? I have a proposition for you. Jake and I had gone to college together, but while I'd been struggling as a freelancer, he'd built a successful business with 12 employees and clients throughout the Midwest. I'd always been a little jealous of his success, but lately I'd been studying him, trying to understand what he'd done differently. Sure, I texted back, already at Muddy Waters in Uptown. An hour later, Jake walked in, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur in his tailored jacket and expensive shoes. He ordered a cortado and sat down across from me, glancing at the business books spread across my table. "Doing some light reading?" he asked with a grin. "Something like that." "What's this proposition you mentioned?" Jake leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "I've been watching what you've been doing with your freelance work. The Innovate Tech stuff is really good. Clean, professional, exactly what startups need. But you're undercharging yourself into poverty." I felt my face heat up. "I'm not in poverty. Dude, you're living in a studio apartment and driving a car that's older than my youngest employee. You're talented enough to be making 6 figures, but you're pricing yourself like you're still in college." He wasn't wrong, but it stung to hear it put so bluntly. "Look," Jake continued, "I've been thinking about expanding my agency to include more design services. Right now, I outsource most of that work to freelancers, but I'd rather have someone in-house who I trust, someone who understands both the creative and business sides. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, 20% equity in the business plus a salary that's triple what you're making now. We rebrand as Thompson Anderson Creative Solutions, and you become our creative director." I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I've been watching you work and I know you got the skills. What you're missing is the business infrastructure, the client relationships, the marketing machine. I can provide all of that." It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been dreaming about. Financial security, creative control, a chance to build something bigger than just a freelance career. But something held me back. "Why me?" I asked. "You could hire any number of more established designers." "Because you're hungry," Jake said simply. "And because you understand what it's like to struggle. The designers who've always had success handed to them don't have the same drive. They don't appreciate it the same way." I thought about my father's words from the reunion. "You'll always be the failure of this family." Here was a chance to prove him wrong in a big way. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course, but don't think too long. I want to make this move before the end of the year." After Jake left, I sat in the coffee shop for another 2 hours, staring at my laptop screen. The partnership offer was tempting, but something about it felt wrong. It felt like giving up on my own dreams to help someone else achieve theirs. I thought about the business books I'd been reading, the success stories I'd studied. Most of them had one thing in common. The entrepreneurs had bet on themselves, even when it seemed impossible. That evening, I called my brother David, who lived in Portland with his wife and 2 kids. David was 4 years older than me and had always been the stable one in the family. He worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm and had never taken a big risk in his life. "I heard what happened at the reunion," he said before I could even explain why I was calling. "News travels fast. Mom called me. She's worried about you. Dad's been in a mood ever since." "A mood?" "Yeah, you know how he gets grumpy, defensive. I think he knows he went too far." I snorted. "Not too far enough to apologize. You know Dad doesn't apologize. It's not in his DNA." I told David about Jake's offer, about the partnership opportunity, about the financial security it would provide. "That sounds amazing," David said. "You'd be crazy not to take it." "Would I? What do you mean?" I struggled to put my feelings into words. "I don't know. It just feels like I'd be giving up on myself, like I'd be admitting that I can't make it on my own." "There's nothing wrong with accepting help," David said. "Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is partner with someone who complements your skills." "I know that. Rationally, I know that. But emotionally, you want to prove Dad wrong." "Maybe. Yeah, probably." David was quiet for a moment. "You know, you don't have to prove anything to him. You don't have to prove anything to anyone except yourself. Easy for you to say. You've never been called the family failure. No, but I've never taken any risks either. I've played it safe my whole life, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to chase something bigger. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, staring at the city lights outside my window. I thought about the two paths in front of me, the safe path with Jake and the uncertain path of building something entirely on my own. I opened my laptop and pulled up the business plan I'd been working on. Not a plan to join someone else's company, but a plan to build my own. A plan to create the kind of design agency I'd always dreamed of running. It was ambitious, maybe impossibly so. It would require me to take risks I'd never taken before, to believe in myself in ways I'd never believed before. But as I read through my notes and projections, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about my future. I picked up my phone and texted Jake. Thanks for the offer. It's incredibly generous and I'm honored you thought of me. But I think I need to try building something on my own first. His response came back quickly. I figured you might say that. The offer stands if you change your mind. I set my phone aside and opened a new document on my laptop. At the top, I typed Anderson Creative Studio, business plan. It was time to stop being the family failure and start being the person I'd always known I could be. 6 months after walking out of my parents' house, I was sitting in the office of First National Bank, wearing the only suit I owned and trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Across from me, loan officer Patricia Chen was reviewing my business plan with the kind of methodical attention that made my palms sweat. Your projections are ambitious, she said, looking up from the documents. You're forecasting a 300% revenue increase in your first year. Based on conservative client acquisition estimates, I replied, proud that my voice sounded steadier than I felt. I've already secured commitments from 3 major clients and I have proposals pending with 5 others. It wasn't entirely true. I had one solid client. Innovate Tech had expanded their contract and agreed to pay me a monthly retainer. The other commitments were more like conversations that had gone well, but I'd learned that confidence was half the battle in business. And you're requesting a $50,000 small business loan for equipment, office space, and operating expenses for the first year. That's correct. I've included detailed breakdowns of all expected costs, plus a 20% buffer for unexpected expenses. Patricia nodded slowly. Your credit score is decent, but you don't have much collateral. This would be primarily an unsecured loan based on your business plan and earning potential. I understand the risk you'd be taking on me, I said. But I've been building my client base for 3 years, and I have a proven track record of delivering quality work on time and under budget. What I didn't mention was that I'd been living off ramen noodles and coffee for the past month, putting every penny I earned toward building my business. I'd created a professional website, invested in high-end design software, and even hired a part-time bookkeeper to help me manage the financial side of things. I'll need to discuss this with my manager, Patricia said, but I have to be honest with you. Most small business loans for creative services are difficult to approve. The failure rate is high, and the income can be unpredictable. I understand that, I said, but I'm not most people. I'm willing to work harder and smarter than anyone else to make this succeed. She smiled at that. I can see that. You've obviously put a lot of thought into this. Give me a week to review everything with my team. I left the bank feeling both hopeful and terrified. The loan would change everything. It would give me the resources to rent a proper office, hire help, and compete with the bigger agencies. But it would also mean real responsibility, real pressure, and real consequences if I failed. That evening, I was working late in my apartment when my phone rang. It was my mother. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. How are you doing? I'm good. Busy. I just had a meeting with the bank about a business loan. Oh, that's wonderful. Your father mentioned you were working on something big. I paused, surprised. Dad mentioned me. He asked how you were doing. He's been asking about you more lately. Has he? I think he's been reflecting on what happened at the reunion. He hasn't said anything directly, but I can tell he's been thinking about it. Part of me wanted to ask if he'd expressed any regret, but I pushed the thought away. I was done waiting for his approval. That's nice, Mom, but I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it for me. I know, honey, and I'm proud of you for that. After we hung up, I went back to work on a project for a local restaurant chain. They wanted a complete rebrand. New logo, menu designs, signage, the works. It was the kind of comprehensive project that the old me would have undercharged for and over-delivered on. But I'd learned to value my time and expertise differently. I'd been studying pricing strategies, and I'd realized that my biggest mistake had been treating my business like a hobby instead of a profession. I'd been so afraid of losing clients that I'd priced myself too low, which had created a cycle of attracting clients who didn't value quality work. Now, I was charging what I was worth. It meant fewer clients, but the ones I had were more profitable and more respectful of my time and expertise. The loan approval came through the following Friday. Patricia called me personally to deliver the news. Congratulations, she said. The committee was impressed with your business plan and your passion. The loan is approved at prime plus 2%. I actually whooped out loud. right there in the middle of the grocery store where I'd been shopping for more ramen noodles. Other customers stared at me, but I didn't care. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I found a small office space in the arts district downtown. Just 800 square feet, but it had great light and reasonable rent. I bought a high-end computer system, professional design software, and even hired a part-time assistant named Lisa, a recent graduate from the local art school who was eager to learn the business side of design. I also did something I'd never done before. I hired a business coach. Her name was Margaret Rodriguez, and she'd helped dozens of creative professionals build sustainable businesses. She was expensive, but I'd learned that investing in expertise was often the fastest way to avoid costly mistakes. Your biggest challenge, Margaret told me during our first meeting, isn't going to be finding clients or creating good work. It's going to be scaling your business beyond just you. What do you mean? Right now, you're the business. Every project depends on your time and talent. But if you want to build something sustainable, you need to create systems and processes that can work without you. You need to think like a business owner, not just a freelancer. It was a perspective shift that changed everything. Instead of just taking on projects, I started thinking about how to systematize my design process, how to train other designers to work in my style, how to create recurring revenue streams that weren't dependent on my hourly input. I also started networking in a more strategic way. Instead of just hoping for referrals, I began building relationships with other business owners who serve similar clients. I partnered with web developers, marketing consultants, and PR firms to create comprehensive service packages. 3 months after getting the loan, I landed my biggest client yet, a tech startup that had just secured Series A funding and needed a complete brand identity. The project was worth more than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined. But the real victory came when I realized I wasn't thinking about my father's approval anymore. I was too busy building the life I actually wanted to worry about what anyone else thought of my choices. That didn't mean the hurt had disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something else, a fierce determination to prove to myself that I could create success on my own terms. 1 year after walking out of my parents' house, I was standing in my newly expanded office space, watching my team of 4 designers work on projects for clients across the country. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the exposed brick walls and the gallery of our best work that covered one entire wall. "David, can you take a look at the Morrison Industries logo concepts?" Lisa called from her desk. She'd been promoted to senior designer and was now managing several major accounts. I walked over to her workstation, where she'd laid out 6 different logo variations for a manufacturing company based in Detroit. The work was clean, professional, and exactly what the client had asked for. "These are excellent," I said. "I especially like the third one. It's bold, but not overwhelming." That's what I was thinking too. Should I prepare the presentation for tomorrow's call? Absolutely. And make sure to include the brand guidelines document. This was what Margaret had meant about scaling beyond myself. I was still involved in the creative process, but I was no longer the bottleneck. My team could handle most projects independently, which freed me up to focus on business development and strategic planning. The numbers were impressive. Anderson Creative Studio had generated $400,000 in revenue in its first year, and we were projected to hit $700,000 in year 2. More importantly, we were profitable, something that had eluded me throughout my freelance career. But the real validation came from the quality of our clients. We were working with Fortune 500 companies, innovative startups, and established brands that demanded excellence. Our work was being featured in design publications, and we'd won 3 industry awards. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is this David Anderson from Anderson Creative Studio?" "Yes," I replied. "Who is this?" "This is Marcus Thompson from Thompson Industries. I saw your work in Communication Arts magazine. I'd like to discuss a potential project." I smiled as I typed back, "I'd be happy to discuss it. Let me have my assistant set up a call." Thompson Industries was a major player in the automotive industry, with annual revenues in the billions. If we could land them as a client, it would be a significant milestone for our agency. That evening, I was working late when my phone rang. It was David, my brother. "Hey, congratulations on the magazine feature," he said. "Mom sent me the article. It's really impressive." "Thanks, I'm still kind of in shock about it." "You shouldn't be. You've built something amazing." I looked around my office at the evidence of everything we'd accomplished. "It's been a lot of work, but yeah, it's pretty surreal." Dad saw the article too. I felt my chest tighten. "Did he?" He didn't say much, but I could tell he was, I don't know, surprised, maybe impressed? "That's nice," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. But the truth was, part of me still craved his approval, even after everything. "He's been different lately," David continued. "More thoughtful. I think what happened at the reunion really affected him." "Has he said anything about it?" "Not directly, but he's been asking Mom about you more. Asking how business is going, whether you're happy. I think he's proud of you, even if he doesn't know how to say it." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about my father and our complicated relationship. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn his approval, and now that I was finally successful by any measure, I found I cared less about what he thought than I'd expected. The next morning, I had the call with Marcus Thompson. He was looking for a complete rebrand for a new division of his company, an electric vehicle startup that was launching in 18 months. We're talking about a comprehensive brand identity, he explained. Logo, color palette, messaging, packaging, website, everything. This isn't just about making things look pretty. This is about creating a brand that can compete with Tesla and Ford. That's exactly the kind of project we specialize in, I said. Can you tell me more about your timeline and budget? Timeline is tight. We need everything completed within 6 months. Budget is flexible for the right partner. We're looking at somewhere between 200 and 300,000 for the complete package. I almost dropped the phone. It would be the biggest single project in our company's history. That's definitely within our capabilities, I said, proud of how professional I sounded. I'd love to put together a proposal for you. I'd like to meet in person first. Can you fly out to Detroit next week? Absolutely. After the call, I sat back in my chair staring at the ceiling. 2 years ago, I'd been living in a studio apartment, driving a beat-up car, and struggling to pay my bills. Now I was negotiating 6-figure contracts with major corporations. But the real change wasn't in the numbers. It was in how I saw myself. I was no longer the struggling freelancer hoping for scraps. I was a business owner, a leader, someone who commanded respect in my industry. That afternoon, I called my mother. Hi, Mom. Oh, hi, sweetheart. I was just thinking about you. I saw the article in that magazine. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom. I have some news. I think we're about to land our biggest client ever. That's wonderful. Tell me about it. I told her about the Thompson Industries opportunity, about the potential for it to transform our business into something even bigger. Your father would be so proud, she said quietly. Would he? He is proud. He may not know how to express it, but he is. He's been carrying around that magazine article in his wallet, showing it to his friends. I felt something shift in my chest. Really? He's been talking about you differently lately. Less criticism, more, I don't know, respect maybe? That's nice to hear. You know, the family reunion is coming up again in a few months. Maybe you should consider coming. I thought about it. The last reunion had been the catalyst for everything that had happened since. In a way, I owed my father's harsh words a debt of gratitude. They'd forced me to stop seeking his approval and start building something for myself. Maybe I will, I said, but not to prove anything to anyone. Just to share what I've built. That's all any of us can do, honey. Share what we've built. As I hung up, I realized that my father's opinion of me had changed. But more importantly, my opinion of myself had changed. I was no longer the family failure. I was no longer defined by anyone else's expectations or limitations. I was exactly who I'd always had the potential to be. I just needed to believe in myself enough to let it happen. The Thompson Industries project exceeded every expectation. Not only did we deliver a comprehensive brand identity that positioned their electric vehicle division as a premium, innovative alternative to Tesla, but Marcus Thompson was so impressed with our work that he introduced us to 3 other major clients. 6 months after that first call, Anderson Creative Studio had a team of 12 employees, had moved into a 3,000 square foot office space in the heart of Minneapolis's design district, and was on track to generate over $1 million in revenue. But success brought new challenges. Managing a larger team, handling complex client relationships, and maintaining quality standards across multiple projects required skills I was still learning. I'd hired a COO, brought in a senior account manager, and was working with Margaret, my business coach, to develop systems that could support our rapid growth. The morning of the family reunion, I stood in my walk-in closet, a luxury I'd never imagined having 2 years ago, choosing what to wear. I'd moved into a beautiful loft apartment in the warehouse district, complete with exposed brick walls, 15-foot ceilings, and a view of the Mississippi River. I settled on dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and a navy blazer. Professional but relaxed, confident but not showy. I was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, but I wanted to look like the successful person I'd become. The drive to my parents' house felt different this time. Instead of the familiar dread that had accompanied every family gathering for years, I felt something close to peace. I wasn't the same person who had fled in humiliation 18 months ago. I pulled into the driveway behind my cousin Michael's BMW, noting that my own car, a new Audi A4, looked perfectly at home among the other successful family members' vehicles. The sounds of the reunion were already in full swing. Children laughing in the backyard, the sizzle of the grill, conversations floating through the open windows. My mother met me at the front door, pulling me into a tight hug. "You look wonderful," she said, stepping back to examine me. "Success suits you." "Thanks, Mom." "Where is everyone?" "Out back mostly. Your father's manning the grill." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "He's been nervous about you coming." "Nervous? I think he's not sure how to face you after last time." I nodded. "We'll figure it out." I walked through the house toward the backyard, stopping to greet relatives along the way. My Aunt Carol complimented me on the magazine article. Uncle Robert asked about my business and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. My teenage cousin Emma said she'd looked up our company website and thought our work was sick, which I gathered was a compliment. Then I stepped onto the back patio and saw my father standing at the grill, wearing his usual weekend uniform of khakis and a polo shirt. He looked older than I remembered, grayer around the temples, and there was something different in his posture. Less certain maybe. Our eyes met across the yard. For a moment we just looked at each other. 2 years of hurt and disappointment hanging in the air between us. Then he nodded slightly. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. I walked over to where Michael and Sarah were sitting with a few other family members. The conversation was flowing easily. Talk of vacations and home renovations and kids' activities. Normal family stuff. David, Michael stood up to shake my hand. Great to see you, man. I heard business is booming. It's been a good year, I said, settling into an empty chair. More than good from what I hear, Sarah added. My real estate agent friend mentioned you guys did the branding for that new development downtown. She said it was brilliant. We've been fortunate to work with some great clients. The conversation continued, and I realized something had shifted. I wasn't being treated as the family failure anymore. I was being treated as an equal, a peer, someone whose success was worth discussing and celebrating. About an hour into the gathering, my father appeared at my elbow. David, he said quietly, could I talk to you for a minute? Inside, I followed him into the kitchen. The same kitchen where he delivered those devastating words 18 months ago. He poured himself a cup of coffee and offered me one, which I declined. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. What I said to you at the last reunion, it was cruel and unnecessary. I studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but found none. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen. I was frustrated, he continued. Not with you really, but with, I don't know, with seeing you struggle, with watching you work so hard for so little return. I thought if I could push you towards something more stable. You thought being cruel would motivate me? He winced. I thought tough love might work where support hadn't. I was wrong. We stood in silence for a moment. I could hear the party continuing outside, the normal sounds of family life that had felt so foreign to me for so long. I've been carrying around that magazine article in my wallet, he said, showing it to anyone who'll look, bragging about my son, the successful business owner. Mom mentioned that. I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of what you built, and I'm proud of how you built it. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. I needed to hear that, I said, but I also needed to stop needing to hear it, if that makes sense. He nodded slowly. It does. You've become your own man. That's what I always wanted for you, even if I went about it the wrong way. I'm not sure I would have gotten here without what happened last time, I said. Sometimes we need to break before we can build something stronger. Maybe. But there were better ways to help you find your strength. Probably. But this is the way it happened, and I'm okay with it. He extended his hand to me and I shook it. Not a hug, that would have been too much too fast, but a gesture of respect and reconciliation. Now, he said, his tone lightening, tell me about this Thompson Industries project I've been hearing about. We spent the next 20 minutes talking about business, and for the first time in my life, my father seemed genuinely interested in my work. He asked thoughtful questions about client management, scaling challenges, and long-term planning. It was the conversation I'd always wanted to have with him, but had never believed was possible. When we rejoined the party, I felt lighter somehow. The weight of decades of disappointment and resentment had lifted, replaced by something that felt like possibility. Later, as the reunion was winding down, my cousin Michael pulled me aside. I wanted to apologize too, he said, for that night in the kitchen. I should have said something, should have defended you. You don't need to apologize for that. Yeah, I do. What he said was wrong, and I just stood there and let it happen. We all make choices in difficult moments, I said. The important thing is what we do next. You've handled all this with a lot of class, he said. I'm not sure I would have been as gracious. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed. Not just in my external circumstances, the business, the money, the recognition, but in how I saw myself and my place in the world. I was no longer the family failure. I was no longer defined by my father's expectations or limitations. I was a successful business owner, a respected professional, and most importantly, someone who had learned to believe in himself. But perhaps the most significant change was this. I no longer needed my father's approval to feel good about my life. His apology and recognition were meaningful, but they weren't necessary for my sense of self-worth. I had become the person I'd always had the potential to be. It had just taken a moment of profound disappointment to push me toward becoming him. 2 years after that second family reunion, I was sitting in the conference room of Anderson Creative Studios' new headquarters, a beautifully renovated building in Minneapolis' North Loop that housed our team of 25 employees across 3 floors. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Minneapolis skyline. a view that still amazed me every morning. "The numbers are impressive," said Jennifer Walsh, my CFO, as she clicked through the quarterly presentation on the large monitor. "We're up 40% from last year with client retention at 92%. The New York office is already profitable after just 8 months. The New York office. 2 years ago, I could barely afford my studio apartment, and now we had locations in 2 major cities. It still felt surreal sometimes." "What about the Chicago expansion proposal?" asked Marcos Rivera, our head of strategy. "Have we made a decision on timeline?" "I think we should move forward," I said. "The market research shows strong demand, and we have 3 major clients asking us to establish a presence there." The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from new service offerings to employee benefits, to our plan for acquiring a smaller agency in Portland. This was the kind of strategic thinking that energized me now. Not just managing client work, but building something that could outlast any individual project or client. After everyone left, I stayed in the conference room looking out at the city. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Your 3 p.m. interview with Minneapolis Business Journal is here." I'd almost forgotten about the interview. The magazine was doing a feature on young entrepreneurs who were reshaping the local business landscape. 3 years ago, I would have been reading about people like that in magazines. Now I was one of them. The journalist, Sarah Chen, was professional and well prepared. She asked thoughtful questions about our growth strategy, our company culture, and what I'd learned about leadership. "What would you say has been the key to your success?" she asked toward the end of our conversation. I thought about it for a moment. "Learning to bet on myself," I said. "For most of my life, I was waiting for someone else to validate my worth or give me permission to succeed. The real breakthrough came when I stopped waiting and started building." Was there a specific moment when that mindset shift happened? I smiled, remembering that night in my studio apartment when I'd started writing my business plan. Yeah, there was. Sometimes the things that hurt us the most are exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be. That evening, I was having dinner at Spoon and Stable with Elena Rodriguez, a marketing consultant I'd been dating for 6 months. She was smart, successful, and completely understood the demands of running a growing business since she was doing the same thing with her own company. "You seem thoughtful tonight," she said over our shared appetizer. "Just reflecting on how much has changed. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Good changes or overwhelming changes? Good changes. Definitely good. But sometimes I think about the person I was 3 years ago, and it's like he was a completely different person." "Growth will do that," Elena said. "The question is, do you miss him? The person you were before?" I considered that. No, I don't think I do. That person was so focused on what he lacked, on proving himself to people who would never be satisfied. This person, who I am now, is focused on building something meaningful. "Your father?" I'd told Elena about the family reunion incident and its aftermath. She'd listened without judgment, understanding that family relationships were complicated for everyone, among others, but mostly myself, I think. I was my own harshest critic. And now? Now I'm my biggest advocate. The next morning brought news that would test that newfound confidence. Jennifer knocked on my office door with an expression I'd learned to recognize. She had something important to discuss. "Sit down," she said, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk about the Thompson Industries situation." Thompson Industries had been our biggest client for over 2 years, representing about 30% of our revenue. Marcus Thompson had become more than a client. He was a mentor and friend. "What about it?" Marcus called this morning. "Thompson Industries is being acquired by a German conglomerate. The new ownership wants to consolidate all marketing services with their existing European agency." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied any major business crisis. Losing Thompson Industries would be a significant blow, not just financially but strategically. "When does this take effect?" "End of the quarter." Marcus fought for us, but the new ownership was firm. They want everything handled by their people. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. 30% of our revenue, gone in 3 months. It was the kind of setback that could cripple a smaller agency. "What are our options?" I asked. "We accelerate the new business development timeline. We've been conservative about taking on new clients because we were at capacity with Thompson. Now we have capacity and urgent need." "How urgent?" "We need to replace at least 20% of that revenue within 6 months, or we'll have to make staff cuts." The old me would have panicked, would have seen this as confirmation that I was destined to fail, that success was always temporary for someone like me. But the person I'd become saw it differently. "Okay," I said, "let's look at this as an opportunity. We've been wanting to diversify our client base anyway. This forces us to do it faster. You're taking this remarkably well. 3 years ago, this would have devastated me," I said. "But I've learned that setbacks are just part of business. The question isn't whether they'll happen, it's how you respond when they do." Over the next 3 months, our team worked harder than we ever had. We pitched new clients aggressively, leveraged every relationship and referral, and even flew to Los Angeles and San Francisco to pursue opportunities on the West Coast. The effort paid off. By the end of the quarter, we'd not only replaced the Thomson revenue but exceeded it. We landed a major entertainment company in LA, a tech startup in San Francisco, and 3 mid-sized companies in Minneapolis. More importantly, we'd learned that we were resilient, that we could handle major challenges and come out stronger. The celebration party we threw at our office was the most fun I'd had in months. Watching my team, people who had bet their careers on our vision, celebrating our collective success was more satisfying than any individual achievement I'd ever experienced. You know what I realized today? Elena said as we stood on the office balcony, looking out over the city. What's that? You're not the same person who was worried about his father's approval anymore. You're not even the same person who started this company. You've become a leader. She was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped thinking of myself as someone who was trying to prove he could succeed and started thinking of myself as someone who was responsible for other people's success. It was a transformation I hadn't expected, but it felt more authentic than anything I'd ever experienced. This was who I was meant to be. Not just successful, but someone who created opportunities for others to be successful too. 5 years after walking out of my parents' house, I was standing at a podium in the ballroom of the Millennium Hotel in Minneapolis, looking out at 300 people who had gathered for the annual Entrepreneur of the Year awards. The spotlight was warm on my face, and I could see Elena in the front row, beaming with pride. When I started Anderson Creative Studio, I thought success meant proving to my family that I wasn't a failure. I thought it meant making enough money to feel secure, or winning enough awards to feel validated. The audience was attentive. A mix of business owners, investors, and community leaders who understood the challenges of building something from nothing. But I've learned that real success isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's about becoming the person you were always capable of being and then helping others do the same. I looked out at the tables where my team was sitting. 28 employees now, across offices in Minneapolis, Chicago, and New York. Lisa, who had started as my part-time assistant and was now creative director. Marcus Rivera, who had helped us navigate the Thompson Industries crisis and build a more resilient business model. Jennifer Walsh, whose financial expertise had been crucial to our expansion. This award doesn't belong to me, I continued. It belongs to every person who took a chance on a struggling freelancer with a big dream. It belongs to the clients who trusted us with their brands, the team members who believed in our vision, and the family members who supported me even when I didn't know how to support myself. After the ceremony, there was a reception where I spent time talking with other entrepreneurs, sharing stories and insights about building businesses in Minnesota. It was the kind of networking I'd once found intimidating, but now enjoyed. I'd learned that success was easier to sustain when it was shared. My parents had flown in for the ceremony, the first time they'd visited Minneapolis since I'd moved into my new apartment. My father looked proud but slightly overwhelmed by the scale of what we'd built. I keep thinking about that night at the reunion, he said as we stood together near the bar. About what I said to you. Dad, we've talked about this. No, let me finish. I keep thinking about how close I came to breaking your spirit entirely, and how different things might have been if you'd listened to me instead of finding your own way. I studied his face. The guilt he'd been carrying was still there, despite our reconciliation. You know what I think? I said. I think everything happened exactly the way it needed to. Your words hurt, but they also woke something up in me. They forced me to stop looking for validation from others and start creating it for myself. But the cost was worth it. Look around, Dad. Look at what we built. Look at the people who have jobs because I decided to bet on myself. Look at the clients whose businesses are stronger because of our work. That doesn't happen if I stay safe and comfortable. He nodded slowly. I'm proud of you. Not just for the success, but for how you've handled it. You've become a better man than I ever expected. I became the man you raised me to be. It just took me a while to find him. Later that evening, Elena and I were in my apartment, still dressed in our formal attire but barefoot, sharing a bottle of champagne and looking out at the city lights. So what's next for the Entrepreneur of the Year? She asked, curled up against my side on the couch. More of the same, I hope. Growing the business, taking care of our people, doing work that matters. That's it? No grand expansion plans? No IPO dreams? I laughed. Maybe someday. But I've learned that the best success is sustainable success. I'd rather build something that lasts than something that grows too fast and collapses. Very wise for someone who used to live on ramen noodles and determination. The ramen noodles were temporary. The determination was permanent. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I have something to tell you. Oh? I've been thinking about what you said in your speech tonight, about helping others become who they're capable of being. Yeah? I want to start a nonprofit for young entrepreneurs who don't have access to the resources and networks we had. Mentorship, funding, workspace, all of it. I turned to look at her more fully. That's an incredible idea. I was hoping you might want to be involved. As a founding board member, maybe a major donor. Absolutely. What would you call it? I was thinking second chances, because sometimes that's all people need. someone to believe in them when they don't believe in themselves. I thought about my own second chance, the moment when I decided to stop being the victim of my circumstances and start being the author of my own story. Perfect, I said. When do we start? The next morning, I was in my office early, as had become my habit. I liked the quiet time before the team arrived, when I could think strategically about where we were headed. The Entrepreneur of the Year award sat on my bookshelf next to the magazine articles and other recognition we'd received over the years. But what I was most proud of wasn't any award or article. It was the photo on my desk of our entire team at last year's holiday party. 28 people who had careers they loved, who were doing creative work that mattered, who were building something together. I thought about the young man who had fled his parents' house in humiliation 5 years ago. He couldn't have imagined this life, couldn't have conceived of the confidence and peace that came with building something meaningful. But he'd had one crucial quality that made everything else possible. He'd refused to give up on himself, even when everyone else had. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother David. Saw the award ceremony coverage in the Portland paper. Mom and Dad can't stop talking about it. Pretty sure Dad has told every person he knows that his son won Entrepreneur of the Year. I smiled, remembering the man who had once called me the family failure. It was funny how success could rewrite history, how people remembered things differently when the outcome changed. But I preferred the truth. I had been a failure by most conventional measures. I had struggled and doubted and made countless mistakes. The difference was that I'd learned to see failure not as an identity, but as a stepping stone. Every setback had taught me something. Every rejection had made me stronger. Every moment of self-doubt had eventually led to greater self-knowledge. As my team started arriving for the day, I felt that familiar sense of purpose that came with building something bigger than myself. We had work to do, clients to serve, creative problems to solve, and dreams to make real. But first, I had a phone call to make to a young designer in Portland who had reached out about an internship opportunity. She'd mentioned in her email that she was struggling to make it as a freelancer, that she was starting to doubt whether she had what it took to succeed. I was going to tell her what I wish someone had told me, that doubt was normal, that struggle was temporary, and that the only failure that mattered was the failure to keep trying, because sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to help you start believing in yourself. And sometimes the person who needs to believe in you most is the person staring back at you in the mirror.